Oh, thank you very much, Diane. I was on a mute indeed. Can you hear me well, everyone? Thank you for that reminder.
Yes, we can hear
Yes.
you.
Oh, great. Thank you, Pavel. And thank you, Diane and Ryder, for joining the session. I will start in a minute just to make sure that everyone is able to join. But meanwhile, if you have like any questions in mind, you can put them into the chat, by typing. And close to the end of the presentation, I will have a Q&A section where I would be glad to hear your questions. And in addition to that, I'm going to share all you see here, the links and everything that I'm going to present are also available on my GitHub repo that I'm going to share. Okay, and I hope that would be a good resource for you if you are looking forward to get your Microsoft Azure Architect certification in upcoming days or weeks. All right. Okay. Let's kick off the session at this moment, and I'll keep an eye on the lobby to make sure we invite everybody into session if they join late. All right. Let's kick it off. Again, thank you everyone for joining this session. As you know, it's part of the Global Azure 2022, and I'm doing that in a cooperation with Cloud Launch and Learn, a global organization where we bring weekly sessions to our audience, and I'm one of the co-organizers with other team members like Hugo and Dwayne and Jackson. All right, let's kick off the session. As we said, this is a little bit information about myself. I'm a Microsoft MVP in Azure, and I'm very glad and humbled to receive that in 2022, this award. In addition to that, I have been Microsoft certified trainer for the last 15 years, and I'm a senior manager in T-Rex Solutions LLC, which I'm actually trying to lead, not trying, but I'm trying to lead a team of engineers, cloud engineers, and solution architects to bring our best solution to our customers and stay on top of the edge in terms of all the changes that are happening in the cloud. I'm also very well versed in healthcare standards, and I worked on that for 12 years. And I'm also, uh, have been presented um, in different venues. In addition to Cloud Launch and Learn, there are, for example, one of the things I'm doing is the Cloud Marathoner blog post that you see here in the bottom. So please check that out if you've never been there. It's so the whole purpose on that is to help everyone in their cloud journey in learning the cloud technologies, services, infrastructure as a code, and as well as security. Okay, later in the year, I'm actually also planning to advance that to other clouds, but you can find a lot of Microsoft Azure related information there. All right, that said, let's actually switch the gears here and look what we are going to cover today. Okay, as it was, announced, as you saw that we'll start first what has changed in 2022 because Microsoft Azure Architect certification and exams has been there for a while. It's not new, but there were big change this year introduced by the end of February, beginning of March. So we'll look into those changes. Second, we'll look into the past, how you can get your Microsoft Azure Architect certification based on these changes. What is the path forward? Then we'll look into the learning resources and practice exams that you can rely on, and they are all going to be listed in my slide and plus on the GitHub repo that I'm going to present to you all. And finally, we'll have Q&A section where I will be glad to hear, your questions and hopefully, guide you in this process so that you can get your, you yourself or your team members, whoever you are helping to get their first Azure Architect certifications. The good news is that once you are able to hopefully achieve your certification, the renewal process is really a breeze. It's very easy. it's much easier than it used to be because you will go through the assessment every year, and once you pass the assessment, you will be able to renew your certification. And all that assessments are based on Microsoft Learn modules, which are also provided as a part of your assessment. All right. Any questions on that so far? Please put them into the chat. I'll be more than glad to look into them and address them as they appear. Okay. All right. So what has changed? This is actually a diagram that I took from Microsoft Tech Community blog post. And as you see, before the end of March 31st, there were different exams. There were exam AZ303, there was exam 304, and it wasn't easy to figure out. But the good news is that if you didn't went after AZ303 or 304, like these two exams in the bottom, then your path forward is actually very straightforward. What you need to have is basically go and pass your Azure Administrator Associate exam, which is the AZ 104, and learn some Azure administration skills. And then once you pass the, let me see, all right, we have Peter joined. So welcome, Peter. And the next, actually, once you pass your Azure Admin Cert, which is AZ104, then you can actually take the AZ305, which is your Azure Architect, Azure Solution Architect exam, right? So here's the difference, though. If you ask me, should I take first AZ104 or should I take first AZ305? It's up to you. Microsoft doesn't have any precondition. However, in order to get your Azure Solutions Architect Expert certification, you would need to pass these two exams, okay? Again, one is the AZ104, Azure Administration, and another one's AZ304. While on Azure Admin Associate exam, you will be more focused toward how you provision and administrate, how you as an administrator manage those resources in Azure. In exam AZ305, it's more toward design and your approach, how you are going to basically handle that. So I'm welcoming John, Marcial, and Peter, and thank you Diane and Raider and Pavel to be here. Okay, all right, guys. If you don't hear me or you see something strange during the presentation, like audio or video goes wrong, please put that in the chat. I really appreciate your feedback. Thank you. So let's move forward. So takeaway from this slide is in order to get your Azure Solution Architect Expert certification, you would have to pass two exams, okay? First one is AZ104 and second one is AZ305. Is there any order? No, you can take them in any order you would like. All right, I hope that clarifies the what has changed. Next, so as I mentioned in the previous slide, there are two steps, right? So Azure Administrator Associate exam is the first option prerequisite that you need to have in place. And then once you pass the AZ305, which stands for Designing Microsoft Azure Infrastructure Solutions, then you will be able to get this Azure Solution Architect certification as well as the badge. All right. Okay. That said, let's look what's inside this AZ305. What they are going to be tested against and what you need to prepare yourself against. It actually consists of four sections, as you may probably know. So first one starts with designing the identity, governance, and monitoring solutions. All right. And while doing this design of the first part, you need to keep in mind that you are not going to be asked about like how you go and actually for example for governance there's a tagging policy, right? So you need to know what's the tagging policies and what are the benefits, but it is not going to ask you go and hands-on implement that during the exam. So keep in mind that uh, this AZ305 exam, which is actually focusing on design, okay, design and approach how you would actually create the solution in terms of the, communication between the services, the benefits that you are going to provide, and requirements that you are going to meet, in order to put the solution forward. So keep that in mind. And while you are looking at each of these, designing identity, governance, and monitoring solutions, of course, while we speak about monitoring, Azure Monitoring Service will come in place, and there are a gamma of sub-services under Azure Monitoring. It's not just one service. For example, Application Insights is an umbrella service which is under the Azure Monitoring that actually helps you to monitor and troubleshoot the issues in your applications. And when we say application, it's not just web apps, okay? It's also API applications that you deploy using your app services. And same applies to the identity, where by identity service, of course, the biggest player there is Azure Active Directory. And managed identities, there is actually different identities, right? There's like managed identities, there's user-defined identities, but the idea behind is you need to know those concepts, when to use which one. And for example, just to give you example, managed identities, right? So that's part of the identity. So what's the difference? Is managed identities, there is a automatic one that you can create and tie it up to the life cycle of the resource. And the beauty of that is that once you actually go and deprovision or remove that resource from your Azure infrastructure, then that managed identity that uh, sorry, then that managed identity which is tied up to your existing resource will be also removed. All right, so it's easy to manage. But when you have a user-defined identity or a user-defined managed identity, then the life cycle of that is actually tied up to you in terms of how you want to manage it and when you want to remove that. And the same user managed identity can be assigned to more than one Azure resource in Azure. All right, that said, let's look at the second part, which is designing data storage solutions. So in this part of the exam, you are going to be asked about not just for example, data storage solutions like Azure Storage Account, but also about relational database storage solutions and non-relational database storage solutions. And as you know, relational database storage solutions is mostly about RDBMS, which is Relational Database Management Systems, which you have in actually Azure. And in Azure, you have a multitude of them. You have some, for example, well-known SQL, Microsoft SQL solutions in managed as a managed service, and as well as you can also run them under the VM, right? You can install your Microsoft SQL Server in your VM and manage that way. And there are differences when to use which solution based on the service that you want to provide, based on the goal that you want to reach with your customer solution. Okay, we have one more person in the queue, and welcome, Magnus. And with these designing data storage solutions, keep in mind that the idea behind would be that on a given customer scenarios, you would have to select which data storage solution actually meets the customer requirement. For example, let's say your customer wants to build a solution which should show relationship between objects, between customers, right? So they want to define customers in some type of database solution where they can have graphs and they can actually go ahead and see the relationship between those customers. Then you need to have some database solution which is actually provide this uh, graph solution, kind of vectors of information. And for that purposes, as you know, there's Azure Cosmos DB that has graph database Gremlin implemented as a part of the solution. So you would have to kind of look at that type of solution. Or let's say you have an open source database. You have, for example, MySQL database that's running on the customer on-premise. It's running on the customer on-premise section. And what you want to do is basically you have a migration test to take that MySQL database and migrate that into Azure. At that point, of course, you have two options, right? One option is that you can create your Azure virtual machine and then kind of install everything there, but then you have to take care of that Azure virtual machine and all the operational requirements it comes with it. And plus, of course, if it is an enterprise, you would have to add the licensing. But with Microsoft managed Microsoft Azure database for SQL, for MySQL, sorry. Again, with the Microsoft database for MySQL, which is a managed service, you can easily actually migrate that MySQL database to a managed database in Azure, and then you don't have to worry about operational concerns like taking care of the disk space or taking care of the operating system updates, patches, and bugs. You wouldn't have to worry about it. What would you have to define is the SKU and required performance of that MySQL database that's going to run as a managed service in Azure, and then you are pretty much done. All right. These are the small examples I'm just giving kind of to connect what to expect on these sections. Next sections it is designing the business continuity solution. And when we speak about business continuity solution, it's all about, do you have a proper, disaster recovery plan, and do you have backups, right? And then of course we dive into the Azure backup services. We dive into the all the services that are supporting that, right? And while doing that, of course, part of it is actually understanding the requirements, how fast, how soon you need to basically, back up your data and have your backups available. And second one is, when disaster happens, what's your plan? What's the timeline that you have in place in order to uh, basically, migrate the system or enable system to run in another region or in another um, yes, in another region, if disaster happen in, for example, one region or one availability zone. Of course, availability zones on Microsoft Azure actually built to sustain to those type of damages. If one of the zones, one of the couple of regions goes down, then another availability zone actually help. But in the case the whole region goes down, then you have this notion of primary and secondary Azure regions where you can use that disaster recovery options. Okay, but you have to plan for it, you have to design for it. Next, the section number 4 here is about designing the infrastructure solutions. And by infrastructure solution, it's a big portion of the exam. As you see, it's almost like 1/3. And here you are going to be asked about like networking solutions, right? Part of it is also going to talk about application infrastructure. Is going to talk about migration solutions and what is baked into that. And with designing infrastructure solutions, keep in mind that, again, it is something that they want you as an Azure architect. The Microsoft is looking into you as the person who understands the solutions that come under the infrastructure and how you can tie them up together, how you can make them work together based on the requirements, based on the use cases that your customer actually wants to accomplish. All right. And if you want to ask like how I can dive into more into these details, actually for each of these items that you see on the screen, and each of these actually sections come with subsections, I have created a blog post on thecloudmarathoner.com, the one that you see in the slide here on the right corner. You can just click there and you would see that post of 12 posts. Okay, we have Nicholas joining the crew. Right. Again, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Nick, for joining. Uh, where I was is that I described all these 4 sections which are coming as part of this AZ305 exam, and each of these big sections, all right, each of these sections actually come with subsections. And what I mean by that, actually, let me bring the blog post that I actually created on the cloudmarathoner.com. All right, let me do that for a second, guys. Okay, here we go. So this is the Cloud Marathoner blog post. Please let me know if you see my sharing. Just, thumbs up or something on the chat would be great. All right, thank you, Peter, and thank you, Gershon, and thank you, Pavel and Nick. All right, great. I hope rest of the team also see everything. So here, if you scroll down, as you see, there's like this 12, okay, 12 blog posts, and each of them are under the section. For example, that first section is where we have the governance, okay, and we have this authentication and authorization. So this comes as this first three parts of the blog post. Second one, which is designing infrastructure solution. As you see, it comes with this designing migration solution, network, and other things. And each of these blog posts actually tries first to give you understanding what this term means, what high availability means in general terms. Then it actually dives into what does it mean in Azure under the scope of Microsoft Azure. And after that, each blog post actually goes into details by describing the, pieces of information from Microsoft, mostly from Microsoft Azure documentation and tutorials from Microsoft Learn to make sure that you actually understand those concepts correctly and you can relate yourself into those concepts by looking into the hands-on examples and tutorials that are listed here on the blog post. And after end of each blog post, for example, this is the blog post 12 actually, but if you go to the first one, which is the governance solution here, you would see that in the governance solutions, it explains what does cloud governance means actually, and then it goes to the picture that actually describes the foundation of the Azure governance. And then of course, after that, it goes through the, pieces and bits that are coming under the Azure governance, like Azure Resource Management, Azure Policy, how you can use, for example, the what role does Azure Rollback Access Control plays there and stuff like that. Okay, let's actually come back to the question here. Thank you, Diane, for putting your question. So first question that we have is, what was the average time that you spent on each section? Did you spend more time on the things you didn't have experience in? That's a great comment. Actually, on each section, on average, I spend like around a week or week and a half, taking into account that, I spend like 2 to 3 hours every day for studying. So my way was more like, starting the day earlier. You can have it later in the evening, doesn't matter, but going through each section by reading the material and then, first of all, completing the Microsoft Learn sections and then reading the Microsoft Docs. All right. And if you want that information to stick with you, to stick with your mind, my way of doing that was that I was going and looking at that services, at that Microsoft Azure services in Azure portal and looking into how I can provision them and how I can make them talk. Again, from perspective of exam, you are not going to be asked to for any hands-on experience, okay? What you are going to be asked is just understanding of service, the benefits, okay, and limitations. And you didn't have, so yes, and for the sections that I didn't have experience, I spend a little bit more time, maybe twice or 3 times more, because let's be honest, Microsoft Azure is huge and it has a lot of services and it is not realistic to know all of them very well. However, as an Azure architect, your role is to have this general knowledge across each service, okay, so that at least you understand the capability, benefits, and use case of the service. But you may not be, for example, expert in Azure DevOps and know all the pipelines, how they work, how for example, YAML is structured and stuff like that. That things are not going to be asked from you. All right. Does it answer your question, Diane? Please let me know. If not, please just, put another question follow up. Okay. All right. Thank you, Abdul, for joining. Again, we have a great number here of people joined. All right, let's move on. This was a small kind of demonstration and I'm going to go through each link that I'm going to share with you. So far, okay, we have one more person to join. So far, what we covered, we went through AZ305 exam before we actually looked into what are the preconditions, and now we looked into each section. So taking into account that we have less time. So learning resources. Let's say you know what's in AZ305, now you need to tackle it, right? And when you learn, the best way is actually to start with one resource, finish it, and then move to the second one, okay? It's tempting to kind of jump from one learning resource to another one, and I will show what are they. But my personal recommendation was that try to keep yourself focused on the things that you started to learn. If you see that it is helpful, stick with that and try to finish it before using another resource. Otherwise, you can get easily distracted and time will just fly away. All right, so what are those resources, learning resources I would suggest? First of all, it's a Microsoft Learn modules. And when I say Microsoft Learn modules, let me bring it. I mean like this collection of services, okay? This collection of services. And you can also find them in the, if you go and look into the objectives, let me look for a second if there is anyone in the, okay. I'm just looking if anyone needs to be admitted or so. No, everything is good. So basically Microsoft Learn modules, right? I will put the link here in the section. All right, I hope you can access that. But what it is basically, for each section that we just demonstrated, these are the Microsoft Learn modules. And once you log in with, on the right side, you would see sign in, okay, here. Let me actually make it bigger. Just a second, guys and girls. All right, let's see. We can zoom in here a little bit. So here it is. So basically, by signing in, you can track your progress. That's the important piece, okay, that I want to show. And you can track your progress, what you finished, what you didn't finish. And by diving into each section, you would see that it has subsections. So try to finish these things because this is a really good information to cover probably 50 to 70% of the exam material. Okay, so keep an eye on it. That's first section. Second, I would say go with Cloud Marathoner Study Guide, which I already shared, and I will put the link again back here in the chat if you didn't get it. At the end of the presentation, I will also provide the QCR code if you want to scan from the screen. Okay, this is the second resource, just which actually explains each module and plus each subsection. Then what you have here is actually third section, which is Thomas Maurer study guide. This is also a useful one to kind of follow because when you look at this, and this is I'm sharing on the screen, this is a little bit actually old because it's from I believe it's like last year, yeah, from November 2021, but it had some updates. So here for AZ305 you can go and check this one. Next here, once you check that one, there's official practice test. And official practice test is actually the one that's uh, recommended by Microsoft. I actually use some of them. Some of them are very handy. Oops, I didn't want to do that, but some of them might be a bit confusing. So it's up to you. If you have like employer who is and you have a training budget, I would actually suggest to go and get that and test yourself before going for the after the exam. Okay, next resource, and I put the link there in the chat. Next resource I would like to recommend is John Seville Study Cram for AZ305. What it is basically a series of it's a YouTube channel which is it's like 3.5 hours long, but this pretty good because he goes and if you look here, he covers like on a high level, he covers those services that you need to be able to do. And what I did on my case, basically, I went first, finished the Microsoft Learn modules, look at study guides, and then before going to exam, let's say a couple days before you go to the exam, I went and watched this Azure Cram, uh, AZ305 exam cram, and this was helpful in terms of recalling what I learned and kind of connecting them to each other. All right. And if you already, give it a try, let me know. Yeah, he is good. I really agree, Diane, and thank you for that uh, comment. All right. Next, actually, is labs and exercises, right? That's really important part. And with labs and exercise, what I mean is, remember, like part of this designing, part of this exam is actually going to ask you about use cases and user scenarios where you kind of need to put some solutioning in front, right? There will be scenario, for example, right, for governance, and I'm going to put that link. This is the actually GitHub link. All right. And for example, I will dive into this compute solution here first. And as you see, it would have this, requirement saying that, hey, here is a scenario. These are the, existing customer service, um, customer kind of environment. And what you need to do is you need to do some modernization, right? You need to do some tasks. And these are the two tasks. So based on these two tasks, you would have to come up with solution. And this is a good kind of warm up for those use cases or that you may see in the exam. You will see actually in the exam at least 2 or 3 use cases that would consist from multiple questions based on the scenario like the one that's described here. Okay, so I would really recommend to go and get yourself familiar with these use cases and how you would be tackling them. All right. Next, actually, in terms of learning resources, I would recommend Azure Architect Center. This is a useful, actually, here it is. I'll put the link in the chat. So this is the place where you can actually look for some ideas in terms of if you want to design, for example, let's say you want to design what's the hottest thing now? It's Kubernetes, right? Let's say you want to Kubernetes, you want to design something with Kubernetes, and then you want to look into some reference architecture. For example, if you are doing this with Databricks and Kubernetes, then you can actually go ahead and look into this architectural design and then kind of get understanding of the workflow of each component, what they are supposed to be doing. It under each component, it will explain each service and their purpose, and it will also give you this consideration, which is very important because that's kind of pretext in terms of what you can achieve and what to expect from this solution, right? And then it will also give you deployment scenarios and some good practices. In addition, you can also download some assets, right? Here we have PowerPoint file. All right. And that said, for example, if you remember, I talked about uh, use cases, right? I talked about customer use cases where during the exam you would be, given like uh, two cases like that, two use cases that you would have to kind of understand, read the requirements, and then put your solutioning, answer the questions. And there are usually between 5 to 7 questions. So one of the ways actually to tackle is that is and get kind of ready with the exam format that you would expect is use the exam simulator. And exam simulator, let me show you what it is. It's basically, oh, it's timed out here. All right, so exam simulator here is actually, I'm going to reload this now. Let me see and bring it again here. Sorry for that. So that exam simulation will look like this. It's actually going to feel and like you are doing actual exam. You would put your NDA. You would say next here on the bottom. It will say, okay, welcome to the exam sandbox. So this is almost like the same experience that you would have with the actual exam in Microsoft Azure. And then part of it is that you will have use case. So it is very handy to have. I would recommend go and check that one. And that's it, how you get ready with Azure resources. Check this Azure always free resources. You can always rely on them to kind of go and play with resources, understand them. Uh, and you can always, check them. There are like 40 plus resources. And that's pretty much it that I wanted to cover. But before jumping in, I want to show you let me go here, the GitHub, right? So if you go to the GitHub solution and click on this getting ready for Azure Architect exam, all the links that I just show you, they are also listed here. Okay, you can rely on them. I'm putting the link here in the chat so you can actually click on each of them and get your hands dirty with that. Okay, you can get your experience. So what we covered, okay, thank you for attending. First we started with what changed in 2022. all right, in terms of Azure Architect exam. Uh, and then we looked into the what is the path forward starting from the April 1st, which means that now you need to go and have that both things like AZ 104 Azure Administrator exam and then AZ 305 exam to be done in order to get your Azure Architect Expert cert. Then we looked into learning resources for the exam, how to get you prepared for it, and then now we are going to look at Q&A. All right, and now it's time. Now, do you have guys any questions? Please put in the chat. I would be more than glad to address them. Please go ahead. And these are the QCR codes, by the way, if you want to use. Okay, thank you. Saved me a ton of searching and time. Wow. Thank you for joining, everyone, and thank you for your comments and questions, Diane. John and Peter, do you guys have any other questions? Please let me know. I'll be more than glad to help you. If you want, actually, you can go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn. All right. And let me actually put that here. Okay, just a second. I'll put my LinkedIn connection here. If you are not connected yet, go ahead and, click on that link and let's get connected. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you, Gershon, for your for all the things that you do. And please let me know, guys, if you have any more questions. I'd be more than glad to help you. All right. Okay. That said, I'm going to stop the. Okay, thank you, Nick, for your awesome feedback here. I'm going to stop the recording here. If you want to come out of mute and speak, I have next 5 minutes for you guys, so you can actually use that one. So I'm stopping the recording at this moment.